Hi, my name is Chip Tarbudden. Welcome to this presentation that's entitled The Definition of Insanity, Part 1, Congress. There are several problems with our country today, and the first one we're going to talk about, which is kind of the easiest one to talk about, is why our Congress is so messed up. And not only are we going to talk about what's wrong, but we're going to give you some specific steps today where you can fix this problem. And this one is relatively easy to fix if we have the courage to do it. Now, Albert Einstein once defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's exactly what's happening with Congress. Now, Congress has a approval rating of approximately 15% or less, depending on when you do the poll. And most people agree that politicians in general, and Congress specifically, is doing a horrible job. Yet, what do? While 97% of people think that politicians are doing a bad job, incumbents win 95% of the congressional races. Talk about crazy. Now let's get one thing straight as we talk about this. We see the Democrat Party for exactly who they are. Or as this cartoon says, when Democrats are in charge, stupid things happen. But it isn't that simple. If Republican leadership looks in the mirror, they'll recognize that oftentimes they are playing the same game as the Democrats. The problem is that everybody thinks that Congress is terrible except for their congressman. And that's especially true in the 6th District, which is where most of the people in the Roanoke Tea Party live. And our congressman is Bob Goodlatte, and he has a reputation for being a fiscal conservative. Well, that reputation is not well deserved. Now, guess how many times Bob Goodlatte has voted for a debt limit increase? 1 or 2? Let's try 13 times. So, Bob Goodlatte vote of approval is on the majority of the federal deficit that we hold, or federal debt that we have every year. So, he has got a lot of responsibility for that because he continues to vote for the debt limit increases. But it's not just the debt limit increases that are the problem. He voted for Medicare prescription drug bill in 2003. On top of the $16 trillion of debt that we now own, that Bob Goodlatte has signed off on, most of we also have $20 trillion of unfunded liabilities from this prescription drug bill he signed off in 2003. On top of that, he also signed off on No Child Left Behind in 2001. That was a bill. That was a bill and a law that even President Obama didn't like, and ended up scrapping this year. And ironically enough, Bob Goodlatte, or in his early days as a congressman, actually said the Department of Education was unconstitutional. Yet he voted for this bill, which expanded the role of the Department of Education that he thought was unconstitutional. That sounds kind of crazy too. He voted for both the National Defense Authorization Act and he actually sponsored SOPA, which is an internet bill, both of which had significant civil rights issues, as well as SOPA being just an awful piece of overreaching federal legislation. If you don't know about those things, you really should learn more. He voted for the fiscal cliff deal. You know, it's not as if aliens descended from the sky and dropped this fiscal cliff issue on Congress and the president. This was a deal that Congress made with the president. They're responsible for this fiscal cliff, not only because of the specific deal with this fiscal cliff, but all the spending that led to the fiscal cliff Bob Goodlatte signed off on. So if anybody's responsible for the fiscal cliff, it's Bob Goodlatte and his ilk in Washington. And lastly, in 2010, Bob Goodlatte promised you he would defund Obamacare. He had all these deals to keep the government running and increase the debt limit that he supported. All of them funded Obamacare implementation. So once again, Bob Goodlatte has lied to you and misrepresented himself as a fiscal conservative. Now, according to the GOP leadership, the problem isn't Bob Goodlatte and his ilk. The problem is you. Being a conservative now, it seems to be an impediment to people's ability to win as Republicans. So the Speaker of the House now wants to let the president lead, and they're purging the few fiscal conservatives in Congress from the budget process. You notice, of course, they're not purging Bob Goodlatte from anything. Now, you have to remember, they think that being a conservative is bad for business. So, and that violates one of their two rules. And their two rules in politics are really simple: get elected and stay elected. And if you remember nothing else from this presentation, remember that the two rules of American politics are get elected and stay elected. So what does it all mean? Well, first of all, establishment Republicans consider themselves entitled to their position. I certainly think Bob Goodlatte feels that. And, Bill Bowling, whose quote here, where somebody's sympathetic to his broken dreams of being the governor, agrees as well. The problem is, they care about their dreams. They're elected to represent us and do a job. And everybody in this country has dreams and goals that aren't achieved, and we should not care one iota about a politician and their dreams. It's not about achieving their dreams. It's about representing the people that elected them and protecting and defending the Constitution that they swear an oath to do. Obviously, Bob Goodlatte has not done a good job of that. Secondly, establishment Republicans know you have nowhere else to go. Now, you've probably seen something like this before, talking about how the Democrats really take advantage of the black voters in this country because 90 to 95% of them vote Democrat, but then they just really ignore their needs as a voting bloc. Well, this seems familiar if you're a conservative. The same words can be used about you. Conservative Americans have been allied with the GOP for 50 years. It's worked out well for the GOP. Conservative voters make up the bulk of their voting bloc, their most reliable donation and fundraising vehicle, and the bulk of their grassroots support. How's it working out for you? I dare say not very well. On top of that, there's really no threat of this ever changing unless there's a threat to cutting off the votes and their money. Because if you don't change the way, this dynamic where they count on you for funding and count on you for support and do whatever they want, they're going to continue to do this when it comes to standing up for your principles. They're going to stick their tongue at you, take your money, and then thumb their nose at you every day until you change the dynamic. Problem number 3 is Republicans are allowing the Democrats to win the hearts and minds of people. Now, we said earlier in this presentation, we saw the Democrats for who they are. And they have a package of ideas and policies that are rooted in lies, distortions, and wicked intent. But at least the Democrats embrace who they are. Republicans, on the other hand, they talk to conservative groups like Tea Party groups or Republican local units who are very conservative generally, like the Ronald Reagan. They can talk the talk. But when it comes to talking to independents, they run away from those ideals, like the Etch-a-Sketch president that just lost the presidential campaign. Now, don't blame me for calling Romney the Etch-a-Sketch candidate. That moniker came specifically from his own campaign staff who said, well, if we don't like that idea, we can just shake the Etch-a-Sketch and change our position. And I think independents see that, realize that there's no core principle to the Republicans. Now, they may not agree with everything the Democrats stand for, but by golly, at least they stand up for what they believe in, even if it's stupid. And we have the right ideas and leadership who's afraid to believe that. And if you're on the fence, who are you going to believe? That's why McCain lost. That's why Romney's lost. That's why every national or state level Republican is going to lose until they start embracing and defending the core principles that we hold dear. It's not just losing elections. It's losing the moral high ground with an inability to talk about principles all the time because they're right. You know, how many, if you went to a church and your pastor wouldn't talk to people outside your church about the gospel, if he violated your principles of your church every time he had an opportunity to, how long would he stay in business? How long would you keep him as your pastor? I dare say most churches would get rid of pastors like that and get rid of them very quickly. Yet for 18 years, we've allowed Bob Goodlatte to be the congressman from Roanoke and violate these principles again and again and again. We're in a battle for the soul of America, and the Republican leadership you count on to fight for you is doing this in regards to principles. They're surrendering. We are right. That's the sad part about all this. Our principles are correct. And it doesn't matter how popular they are. We will not apologize for those. We will not back down for those. And we need leaders who will fight for those principles and sell people on the fact that these principles are correct. Would these people today be known if they were establishment Republicans? I look back at history, and what would if these famous people from history acted like establishment Republicans today? I dare say we wouldn't remember them very well. Let's say if Patrick Henry was an establishment Republican and he was trying to give the "Give me liberty" or "Give me death" speech, I dare say it would sound more like this: "I'm looking for the king to lead on bringing about liberty in the spirit of bipartisan cooperation." That doesn't really have that same inspirational look, does it? Or if George Washington were offered to be the king and refused it after he was left the generalship of the Continental Armies. I think if he was an establishment Republican, he'd probably look at the polls and say, if I was the king, I could create a lot of jobs. Or if Winston Churchill, when he was fighting the Nazis in those dark days of World War II, were an establishment Republican, you might get something more like this: "We will never surrender, well, unless it doesn't work, or we can't get a better deal, or if I might not get reelected, or whatever." So we need leadership. These people are not going to lead, and we know they're not going to lead. So if we don't change this, we're the ones that are crazy, because we're following that definition of insanity. But we have a plan at the Roanoke Tea Party, and we need your help. And the plan for federal issues is really pretty simple. We've got plans for the state level as well, which are just equally important, which we'll talk about in part 2. But at the federal level, it's really just getting rid of incumbents. In 2012, Karen Kotowski got 34% of the votes in the Republican primary. Until we get somebody to replace Bob Goodlatte, we're never going to see sanity again from a political standpoint. So we need to continue to increase that and find people who are willing to fight that change and to make that change, both at and be willing to vote for somebody different. So how do you do that? Well, talking to Bob Goodlatte is worthless. You're not going to convince him at this point. Remember, there are 2 rules of politics: get elected and stay elected. Until Goodlatte is really scared he might lose his position, he's not going to change, which means you got to protest Goodlatte, you got to have support for his opposition, and there needs to be a zero-tolerance policy for his nonsense. This balanced budget nonsense he brings up every year. The real balanced budget amendment would be him voting no on bad legislation. It's as simple as that. So how do we do this? We need to get the word out to people. People think Bob Goodlatte's doing a good job. We need people to know he's not, by circulating flyers, advertising, and we need an opposition candidate to be well funded. We can do the more money and funding we have at the Roanoke Tea Party, the better job we can do in getting the word out about Bob Goodlatte. So we need your money. If you go to the RoanokeTeaParty.com website, in the top left-hand side, you can donate, and we'll use that money for this effort as well as other efforts. And if you want to join us, we need your help. We need help getting the word out. We need your passion. And you can join the Roanoke Tea Party as a voting member for $25 a year. And we'll use your resources and your effort to help us, get somebody in Washington who will lead. We need help doing this. We have a plan, and we need your help. It also means something that's very difficult, and sometimes difficult for Republicans to embrace, and that is, if a bad Republican gets the nomination, we need to let them lose, and no one likes that. But remember, if we keep doing what we're doing now, we're going to lose anyway. Establishment Republicans know you have nowhere else to go until we find another party, or we just say no and let them lose. And that's what's going to have to happen until we get that courage. We're going to continue to have Bob Goodlattes, and we're going to get in the same place we would be whether we have a Democrat or a Republican. And we need to keep elected officials on a short leash, even if we finally get one we like. If Karen Kotowski or somewhere else were to win the election in 2014, if they turn on us, we need to kick them out of office and find somebody to replace them. What it's not is begging for support or thanking them for occasionally throwing us a bone. We need to have a zero-tolerance policy for Bob Goodlatte and replace him as quickly as possible. The bottom line is, it's the Constitution and principles on every issue, every time. I'll close with this thought. If you're not doing something to fix this problem, you're part of the problem. And this quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor who helped fight Nazi tyranny in Nazi Germany and cost him his life. His quote here, if you pause this and read this, I think it really matters. You've got to get off the couch. We got to get your help. We're the Roanoke Tea Party. find us at RoanokeTeaParty.com. We have a plan, and we need your help.